Hello and welcome. This is session 3 of the Just Transition series. My name's Treby and I'll be your host for this webinar, which will kick off now at 11 o'clock and run for 90 minutes through till 12:30 Victorian time. So that's an hour and a half for those of you who might be calling in from non-Victorian time. We've got a stellar lineup for this session about lessons learnt in the field, what's working well in community benefits in renewable energy. I'm really excited to welcome you all to be present, to listen, and to get involved. So we've got a really good agenda for you today. So we'll get straight into it. I'd like to start by acknowledging the many lands from which we're meeting on. In the spirit of reconciliation, I acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and I extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today. I'm at home on beautiful Wurundjeri country by the Birrarung, the Yarra River, and I pay my respects to the Wurundjeri people. We've got panelists calling in from all across the land that we call Australia, and I can, in the registrations list, I could see that we've got participants dialing in from across the country. So if you know the land that you're calling in from, please take a moment to put that in the Zoom chat so we can see who we have in the audience and where you are across this land. It's always a nice way to start a session like this by connecting with one another and also taking the time to acknowledge that the land that we're on and the land that we're here to talk about, that this energy transition is taking place on, is Aboriginal land. So if you're happy to, we've got someone calling in from Aotearoa. Thanks for joining. I imagine we'll have people calling in from across lots of different places. So take a moment to do that and to get comfortable with that chat. So what we're here to explore today is lessons from the field. You know, what's been learned in community benefits in the renewable energy sector. We're joined by 3 very skilled and talented speakers to dive into this topic, and I'm pleased to have them all along. I'll introduce them properly and you can meet them all in a moment. But through this session, we'll be exploring practical examples of how renewable energy projects are delivering benefits for local communities. And that, includes from co-investment to social programs. So there's a bit of a range that we'll chat through today. There's a little bit of housekeeping to get into before we go any further. So I'll just go to the next slide if you could, Millie. Thanks. And that's a perfect moment for me to introduce my colleague Millie, who will be our tech support for the session. So you might hear us call out to Millie in the background, but if you have any questions or you drop out of the call, Millie's email's on the screen and you can reach out to her. Or if you're having issues with the chat and you want to send a question through, Millie's your person. This session is recorded, so it's available afterwards if you wanted to rewatch or if there was something that you missed and you wanted to catch up, please feel free to do so. You can also share it with your colleagues and community. We'll be using the Zoom chat for comments and discussion throughout, so really feel free to engage with that. You might have come along to another session and you're kind of used to and comfortable doing that. Please make use of that. We'd love to hear from all of you through that chat. We'll be using the question and answer function for the panel, so you can ask your questions in the webinar chat, but I'll see them more quickly and get to them faster if you put them in using the question and answer button. So hover over your Zoom, you get that little icon for question and answer when it's time for the panel. My role today is to keep us to time and to facilitate your questions and to make sure we get into a nice and deep discussion. Our panel here today are here to share their views based on their experience, which is pretty extensive in the field of community benefits. They don't necessarily, all of their views don't necessarily reflect those of the organisation that they're here to represent. So please keep that in mind. We're going to get straight into it. I imagine many of you know who Capire Consulting Group is because you've found yourself in this webinar series. So you've come across us on LinkedIn. Maybe some of you I've worked with you before. I can see some familiar names in the chat. For those of you who don't know us well, we're one of Australia's largest specialist community engagement consultancies. Our purpose is to help our clients understand their communities and create positive outcomes. We are a leading voice in engagement practice in Australia, and we deliver tailored strategies for projects, policies, and places. As part of this work, we have a really long history working in the energy sector, and we're continuing to work with communities and governments to support the transition to renewable energy. In my role at Capire, I'm an associate and I have the pleasure of also being a team lead. And I get to work across lots of really interesting projects, including some in the energy transition or transformation space. Um, so as part of our work in this space, and our work in the renewable energy sector, we've been working across a really wide range of projects in Australia, and we decided to put on this Just Transition series as an opportunity to really talk about and connect lots of different work that's happening across all of Australia and provide an opportunity for people to connect and learn and share. So part of this webinar series will help us understand how we continue to lead and support best practice engagement based on your feedback and insights. But we're hoping that this webinar series is really just the beginning of a conversation to connect people who are working on similar things in interesting fields and and to start a conversation and continue those connections. So we're at session 3 of 6. So we're halfway through a pretty big week for us at Capire who are working on a few of these. We kicked off on Monday with a plenary, which was such an interesting and great discussion. And there was already a bit of talk about community benefits when the panelists at that session were asked, what's a just transition look like to you? The idea about the fairness journey and about how, local communities are brought on board was a key point of discussion at that session. Yesterday, there was a conversation about local leadership, the role of local councils in Australia's energy transition, and the role that they have to play. Today, we'll be talking about community benefits, and we'll also have a session this afternoon at 2:00 Victorian time about Indigenous leadership in the energy transition. And then tomorrow, we'll tidy things up with a conversation about powering the land, agriculture and energy. And then we'll have an engagement for success session, which will actually be a meeting with breakout rooms. So you'll have the chance to kind of sort of have smaller group discussions as part of that conversation. So if you haven't registered for any of the upcoming sessions and you're interested, you're welcome to. Or if you missed some of those first two and you're sort of kicking yourself, sign up for our emails and you'll get the recording online that you can watch back. So what we've got in store for you today is some welcome and introductions, which we're on the way to doing. And then we'll have a presentation from each of our panelists, which this structure is designed so that the panel can really kind of set the scene and share some knowledge about some topics that some of you know heaps about and some of you might be completely new to. So this will kind of set the scene and you'll get a bit of an understanding about who our panelists are and the work that they do and what they've been learning. And then after that, we'll have a panel discussion. So you'll have the chance to ask your questions. Some of those questions you submitted before this session, which was really helpful to help us shape this conversation. And some of those will come to you during the presentation. You might kind of think of something that you want to ask. And then we'll close out at 12:30, thank our panelists. And hopefully you'll give us some feedback to help us improve how we continue to deliver in this space. So our panelists. In my introduction, I should have also said I'm not an expert in community benefits, but I am in a privileged position to work across renewable energy projects as a consultant at Capire. But it doesn't matter that I'm not the expert in community benefits because we are fortunate to be joined today by some wonderful and knowledgeable folk in this space. So we've got Lu Allan from Realliance, who's the Advocacy Director. Lu has experience working in renewable energy transformation across Australia. She grew up in regional Victoria and has an instinct for fairness and bridging political divides. She's highly skilled in advocacy, strategy, and systems thinking. Lu brings over 10 years' experience as an activist, campaigner, and policy communicator, and we're very lucky to have Lu on the panel today. Dr. Anna Berka has worked as a practitioner, researcher, and consultant in community energy and inclusive innovation over 12 years. She's worked in countries including the UK, India, New Zealand, and Australia. And she brings experience in impact evaluation and policy analysis. Anna works at Community Power Agency and supports their mission to build an evidence base that can support energy democracy and deliver local benefits from an energy infrastructure perspective in Australia and beyond. We're also joined by Koel Wrigley, who's a passionate engagement specialist with over 10 years' experience. She's engaged on a range of topics, from renewable energy to park management, and in her current role at Tilt Renewables, she delivers both community engagement and benefit sharing. Koel has a natural talent for all things engagement, and she's quick to understand complex technical matters and can translate those into accessible public content. Thanks for coming along, Koel. So, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Lu Allan to talk us through the high-level scene setting of community benefits and observations and lessons learnt from your perspective.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Kaz, and thanks so much for having me and for hosting this discussion. I think it's really interesting. Do you have my slides there? Oh, sick. Yeah, nice. Um, we could probably go straight on to the next one. So I'm calling in from Melbourne. I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, their elders past and present, and any First Nations people who might be on the call today. I can see a few familiar names on the call too, and some people from our regional leaders network as well. So, yeah, nice to see those names. I wish I could see your faces, but I can't. But yeah, super happy to be having this discussion. I think probably a lot of people might know who we are, but we're RE Alliance. We want to support the transition to renewable energy, result in long-term lasting benefits for regional Australia, and leverage all of that investment that's coming in into meaningful outcomes and reduce risk as well as much as we can. And so, what does that actually look like in practice? What are we doing with our time? We have people who are on the ground working with these regions, and working with regional leaders and helping people learn from what each other are doing in different parts of the country. Things are quite different in different states as well. So we try and stay abreast of all the differences in the policy architecture, kind of instructing how things are happening in different places, and just helping people learn from each other and make sense of what's a complex environment. But we also have a bit of a public presence, so we're often in the media trying to correct the record on a number of things. I don't think it's probably controversial to say that renewables can be quite politicised in a lot of regions in Australia, and there's a lot of misinformation and a lot of deliberate organising of that misinformation happening, and so we're in there trying to mitigate the impact of that and set the record straight. Not to say that everything is perfect, because it certainly isn't. There's a lot of challenges that we need to address. But yeah, we're there in the media trying to point to what those challenges are, what those solutions are, and correct the record on a number of things. And we're trying to influence industry practice and government policy always to raise the bar of practice and help governments and industry understand regional communities and how this development fits in with everything else that regional communities are thinking about and working on and doing, and how we can see more opportunity and less risk from all of the infrastructure that's happening. Yep. So I was putting together this presentation, and I was thinking, oh, it would make sense. I'm going to be the first speaker. Let's start with the definition of community benefit sharing, because it can be a bit confusing. But that's also kind of boring. So I thought maybe we could do it as a game show. I will just throw out there an example, and then I want to hear in the chat about whether this is community benefit sharing or not. So just you can put a little yes or a little no in the chat, based on these examples. Okay, so here's the first one. A renewable energy company has a grant program, and they give small grants out to community groups, and they grant a community food co-op a grant to be able to buy a new freezer. Is that community benefit sharing? Let me know. We've got a yes, Margaret, thank you. We've got a no. We've got a yes. Oh, mixed, very mixed. That's really interesting. Okay. I'm not going to give you the answers yet. Let's do the next one. A renewable energy company provides a local footy team with a sponsorship so that their name's now on the footy jersey and maybe a few other places as well. Is that a community benefit? Oh, some pretty strong no's coming in. Anyone think it is community benefit? Okay, interesting, interesting. Okay, next one. A road upgrade. A renewable energy company upgrades a local road so that it is safer to drive on. Is that a community benefit? Yeah, we've got some yeses coming in. Maybe. I like the maybe. Free, prior, and informed consent. Thanks, Siobhan. Important. Some interesting caveats coming through. Okay. What about housing for workforce? The renewable energy company puts up some temporary accommodation to house the workforce that will be coming to construct the project. Got some no's, some big no's. If it's temporary, no. Depends. Yeah, cool. All right. Thank you so much for that. That's really interesting. And I just wanted to do that exercise because uh, it can be a bit contested sometimes where the border is around what is community benefit sharing and what's not. I've got my own views, but I think a lot of you in the chat were saying, oh, it kind of depends. And I think that's true in a lot of cases. It really depends on the context. So for something like a road, was that road actually necessary for the company to upgrade anyway? Because otherwise they're not going to be able to get any trucks through. Or maybe they were kind of damaging the road by driving so many trucks through during the construction period, and so they were going to need to upgrade that road anyway. Or maybe it was a separate road that actually wasn't used at all for construction, but it was a road that really needed to be upgraded, and that was a priority for the people in the area. And then so you could argue that is a community benefit. So yeah, the context is important. I'd say for housing, context is super important as well. Is it providing legacy housing? Is it reducing the amount of risk for the local housing market? Are they going beyond compliance? These are all really good questions to be asking. Footy sponsorships, I thought it was interesting that everyone was pretty much saying no, because I think sponsorships is one that's confused often and often talked about as a community benefit. And don't get me wrong, love a sports sponsorship. I'd love to see more renewable energy companies sponsoring local and not so local sports teams. I think that's really cool. I don't think it is a community benefit because it is a form of advertising and there's clearly something that the company's getting out of it. So it's not quite sitting in that bucket of community benefit sharing. Um, and the food bank freezer, again, it depends, but I'd say that probably is a community benefit. It's probably the most classic example in terms of there's a grant program, people apply for the grants, and you might have different grants going to smaller community groups. That's probably the most traditional kind of thing that people think of when they think of community benefit sharing, but there's so many other different things that it can look like as well. So thank you so much for participating in the first episode of this community benefit sharing the game show. Happy to move on from there. So Kaz asked me if I could give a little like short history of community benefit sharing and renewables in Australia, and I thought that's really boring, but then I thought about it some more. Turns out it's not boring. And RE Alliance has actually done a number of snapshots across the years about the state of play of community benefit sharing, specifically in wind. And it is crazy to see how much has changed just in the short period of time that we've been doing these snapshots. So we did our first one just before 2018. And at that time, there were 82 wind farms in Australia. 50% of them around about had community benefit sharing programs. And collectively, the ones that did have those community benefit sharing programs, they were paying approximately $2.5 million annually into regional Australia. And we did this report. It was pretty funny to look back on. It was like not that long ago, really, but we were going, isn't this amazing? $2.5 million for the whole of Australia from renewable energy. And because it was new at the time and it was really different. And, we were kind of out there pushing community benefit sharing and trying to broaden people's understanding of it and helping people see and visualize the fact that renewable energy was contributing to regional communities. But yeah, it's really interesting because that figure of $2.5 million annually, you could probably these days pick just two projects and they would be doing that if they were on the larger end of the spectrum. So it's just massive how much has changed in that time. Part of that change is just the size of projects, the amount of megawatts per project. And so there's this really quick escalation that's happened in how much community benefit sharing is being paid out, but there's also been a huge maturity of practice and also in state and federal policy guidelines as well. Could probably move on to the next slide. So these stats that I've got on the right, they're actually not from one of our reports. They're from the CEC Best Practice Charter report because that's the most recent one. They didn't do the same kind of study that we did, where we're literally looking at everyone and doing a whole snapshot. But they look at their Best Practice Charter participants and what they're doing. So it's just, yeah, again, it's just really huge to see over just a short period of time how much the community benefit sharing practice has increased and emerged. And, we know that those per megawatt figures and the number of projects participating and all that kind of stuff, that's great, but it's also the quality has improved as well. And we've seen a maturing of the creativity, the different types of community benefit sharing projects that we're seeing, and the partnerships that are being built between renewable energy companies and communities and community groups of all different kinds. It's really cool to see. And yeah, I think I mentioned this, but yeah, in that time is we've seen the emergence of guidelines. Probably most states now have their own guideline. And there are also other guidelines attached to things like grid connection processes, and the capacity investment scheme will have merit criteria and other mechanisms that speak to community benefit sharing and the kind of things that sit around that. I thought it was useful to just touch base very quickly on some of the challenges that can come up that we've seen. There's a number of things, not probably comprehensive, but just to hint at some of the challenges that we're seeing and that are worth thinking about, particularly as the sector continues to grow and expand, and as communities are experiencing many multiple projects at once and trying to navigate that. So energy companies, surprise, surprise, with all love and due respect, are not always good at managing grant funds. It's not really their area of expertise. And so sometimes we see things like really onerous application processes that don't quite match the size of the grant. For example, like if you're applying for a $5,000 grant, you don't want to be asking someone to be filling out pages and pages of application and providing all kinds of detail about your organization, because maybe it's a volunteer that's doing that, and that organization doesn't have any paid staff. So these are the things that we can kind of see, and we see that as a product of these are not philanthropic organizations who are experts in how to manage grants and all that kind of stuff. So it's something that, yeah, we can see as an issue. Companies often partner with local governments or local community groups to manage the grants, which is great. And that raises other questions, which I think we'll get into. Are you trying to move me along, or just flick it? Is it okay if I spend a bit more time on this one?
Yeah, we've
Do
got plenty of time, Lou. I think
Wait,
Millie's just trying to make sure she's on the right slide. You can give a next slide prompt from now if you
apologies, no stress. The yeah, we've also seen sometimes companies stop promoting and running their community benefit fund after they've been operating for a few years. You know, when they're in the development phase and the construction phase, everyone in the community kind of sees what's happening, and it's a big story about what's happening in that place at that time. And so the community benefit sharing story is part of that. And so there's people, there's opportunities to promote that, opportunities to bring people into that conversation. But once the project's been operating for a few years, there's probably not community engagement staff on the ground anymore. Um, they might just sort of quietly stop promoting their community benefit fund. And so we have seen that happen, and that's not ideal. Um, so yeah, would love to see ways that that can kind of continue to stay on the radar. Small grants have limitations. So we've also seen after a few years, maybe most of the community groups have had opportunities to have grants awarded for different things. But that grant program has then basically fulfilled all of the kinds of needs that you can actually meet with small grants. Other needs probably need something bigger or more strategic or long term. And so there's limitations on what you can do with a small grant program. Uh, yeah, I kind of hinted at this, and you know, you're probably very all aware, but there's so many projects happening in some regions, and it's very overwhelming to have so many projects talking to you about all kinds of things, let alone community benefits as well. So it's a ongoing challenge, which I think we'll get into in the discussion, is how do we actually leverage multiple community benefit programs from multiple proponents across a region for long-term strategic outcomes. Um, when projects are sold on, sometimes the commitments are not continuous, and so this kind of speaks to the value of due process and accountability. So making sure that you've got mechanisms of accountability baked in so that if something big happens, like the project gets sold, that those commitments still need to be there. And you know, if you're here and you're from a local government or you're from a community group and you're talking to developers about this kind of thing, you know, ask like what is in place to make sure that if the project is sold, that what you're telling me is actually going to continue on into the future, and try and get an actual agreement on that. Um, so yeah, it takes time and resources and skilled capacity to be applying for and reporting on grants. And so yeah, just being aware that that's not always something that regional community groups, particularly volunteer-run groups, have. And so how can we build the capacity for some of those groups and or just reduce the burden for application processes, and just yeah make it easier for people to be able to access basically the funding and the opportunities that might be coming through. Tricky one always is defining the right geographic area for benefit sharing programs, if it's defined at all. So yeah, it might be just the very small area around the project. It might be quite big. It might be within the whole local government area or even multiple local government areas. It depends on the context a lot. And that can be a difficult question to be thinking through when you're thinking about your community benefit sharing program. Not always, they're not always legally binding. They can be for a number of reasons. They can be part of compliance for development applications or other permitting aspects of the project. They can be part of like VPAs, for example, in New South Wales, or other agreements with local governments. But yeah, they are not inherently legally binding unless there's an actual legal agreement behind them. So just because it's on someone's website doesn't mean that that's legally binding. So that's just something to be aware of if you're thinking about this as someone working in a local government or a community, how do we make sure that these commitments that are being made, these things that are being said, are actually going to exist in the long term? And yeah, holding people accountable. Uh, so agency is big. We'll probably talk about that later. Um, so yeah, and I think this is improving a lot as well, is ways to provide the communities with more agency about how the funds are spent. And the delivery partner can be a question mark in a lot of places as well. Local governments usually will be the first to say it should be local government who are managing community benefit sharing funding on behalf of developers, and community groups are often saying it should be community groups. And sometimes developers hold on to that process, and so that's something to navigate as well. And I think there are yeah, advantages to each option, and it depends a lot on the context. Yeah, we can go to the next one. Uh, something that something that's tricky at the moment is we're hearing a lot of people come to us and go, okay, just tell us what is the per megawatt dollar figure that we should be asking for, or what's the dollar figure per megawatt that we should be providing. Um, that's a really difficult question to answer for a number of reasons, because each place is just so different. Each project is different. The kinds of impacts you're going to have is going to be different. The needs of that community, size of that community is going to be different. And so it's actually quite difficult to provide advice around what's the appropriate per megawatt dollar figure for a community benefit fund. So there are some guidelines and some jurisdictions that give a figure, and that can be helpful. Some people might be finding that helpful or unhelpful. I'm really interested to hear. Uh, but yeah, that's kind of this emerging discussion about do we need a like clear guideline on what that figure should be, or is it more complicated than that? A murky definition of what constitutes community benefit. So we've kind of seen that in the discussion we were having earlier, is sometimes it can be contested whether something's a community benefit. And I think it's why this is a challenge is because I've seen companies try and sell the upgraded road, which they needed to upgrade anyway, as a community benefit. I've seen governments conflate community benefit and impact mitigation. Sometimes that's genuinely grey, but most of the time you can kind of say, no, that's actually just an impact mitigation. It's not a community benefit. So making sure that we understand the difference there is really important. And yeah, like let's just have clarity about what's actually leaving a legacy benefit for the community and leaving the community better off than they would have been without the project. Uh, yeah, this emerging idea of impact and social value, and yeah, a desire to kind of get away from things like social license and, just talking about the amount of money that you've been able to provide, but how do we get more sophisticated in talking about what kind of impact we're creating and what kind of value we're creating for the community. We're seeing that as an emerging conversation, and that's really interesting to us. Community Power Agency and RE Alliance are actually together looking to do a piece of work around that. If anyone's interested to help us with that, please get in touch. Uh, we, yeah, this big question at the bottom, how do we leverage multiple community benefit streams from multiple developments? This is huge. And even since I started doing this work about 5 years ago, this was something people were talking about. How do we do this? And we've seen a number of people try in different places, try and start the conversation and try and get the ball rolling with some kind of architecture or mechanism or new organization or whatever the model is to try and do this. Unfortunately, we haven't seen it work anywhere yet. We really want to see it work. We really want to see people trying different models in different places and just seeing what works and experimenting and having the flexibility to change. But I think this is really the million-dollar question, because if we can answer this and if we can unlock this, that is just huge for regions and unlocks so much more strategic, long-term, sustainable community benefit sharing and provides the industry with a really strong pathway to be able to contribute to communities in a way that's going to be super strategic and useful for those regions. So um, yeah, and also like that can be a bit contested as well, probably should say, in the sense that um, it can you need to think about, okay, is there going to be a hyper local community benefit scheme that just looks at the directly impacted community around the wind farm? Because we don't want, for example, that region to feel like the broader region and the big town in that region is getting all the funding now instead of that going to that like most impacted area. So that is a sensitive thing to manage during that process. But this is a huge question, and just again a shout out to Community Power Agency because they've done some really deep thinking on this and they've been working with communities on this and trying some things, and they're getting close to giving us an example of where this is done. But yeah, there's still a bit of work to do. So yeah, just a huge shout out to Community Power Agency. They've got a resource on their website about this, about the different types of models that you could use to do this. So if you're interested in that, please go to their website. Yeah. Yeah, so I mentioned the snapshots that we do periodically to look at what's happening across the board in the industry for community benefit sharing. Um, we haven't done one for a few years. We've been busy, but this is the principles that we set out in our latest edition as being really important. So I'm not going to labour this too much, but I think it's so easy to just focus on the per megawatt figure and the size of it and who's going to manage it. But I just want to say where we've seen it work really well, it's not necessarily because they've got a huge per megawatt figure fund that's going into the community, but it's more because they're actually really embodying these values. And particularly agency is really big. If everything's being held by the company, everything, all the decisions are being made, and it's not super clear how decisions are being made or how applications are being assessed, it is difficult to feel like you've got any agency as a community over that. And so it's not going to be seen as valuable. It's not going to be seen as yours. It's going to be seen as an external agent kind of having control over the thing. So wherever you can build more agency into the program, that's going to be huge in terms of just building that trust and relationship that you want to be doing. Yeah. This is probably the last main point I want to make, and this is my personal main bandwagon that I am always trying to get people to understand, which is community benefit sharing is not at all the only way that renewable projects contribute to communities. So I often see people jump straight to community benefit sharing when they're starting their community engagement, or when regions are starting to think about how to talk to renewable energy developers. But there's so many other things that you need to be thinking about probably before you get to that point. And also making sure you understand the difference between these kind of loose categories, I'd say. So if I could split it into three categories, I'd say the first one is the cost of doing business. And that is literally the direct economic activity of that project. So it might be rates for the local council or payment in lieu of rates or whatever that looks like in your state. Sometimes it looks like nothing if that's what you've got in your state. That also includes the payments to landholders and potentially to neighbours. So that can be quite a lot of money for local farmers, which can be great. Uh, so this is all really good stuff, but it's not community benefits. Local jobs and contracts, if it's, it's just the company doing business and complying with the kind of framework, it's not necessarily a community benefit. It is a benefit, but from the I suppose discipline of community benefit sharing, that's a bit separate. It's just you're doing your business as a company. Uh, you got impact mitigation. So there's so many things that these projects are doing because they're such huge projects. They've got a lot of work associated with them, a lot of impacts associated with them to do that impact mitigation. So that looks like making sure that their workforce is accommodated in a way that, yeah, if we could probably just go back to the other one. Yeah. Uh, so we're on impact mitigation. Um, so for example, the environmental mitigations that you might be doing as part of your environmental approvals, that's all part of your impact mitigation. Accommodating your workforce in a way that doesn't create undue strain on local housing markets. That's impact mitigation. Maybe you need to upgrade something to do with the local sewerage to accommodate the workforce. It might be the water supply for the area. You're providing an upgrade there. But that's all what you need to be doing to build the project. It's not a community benefit. And just understanding the difference there. And I say that because it's really important to be engaging on that stuff and talking that renewable energy companies and regional communities, local governments are addressing all of this stuff and communicating about all of this stuff, as well as community benefits. And community benefits is like the cherry on top. Community benefits is what is the company doing to make sure that they're seeing that the project is actually going to leave the community better off than the community would have been without the project. Um, and so if you've got a great community, I say this because if you've got a great community benefit program, that's good. But if you're not doing this impact mitigation stuff, um, then it's going to be hard for the community benefit program to actually do what it's meant to do in terms of building trust and goodwill and relationships and all of that. And I want to emphasize too, in a context where we've got renewable energy zones and multiple projects in one region, this impact mitigation piece really is difficult because it's not just the impact of your project or of one project, but trying to coordinate impact across a number of projects. And where local governments are doing that and communities are doing that, that's really difficult work, often very under-resourced work. And so if we're jumping straight into the community benefit without doing that work around coordinating impact mitigation and making sure you're reducing the risks that are coming into that community from all of that, it's going to be tricky to talk about community benefit sharing and land a great community benefit program.
We might
So I,
need to just don't want to rush you at all, Lou, but we've still got two more speakers to get through on some
yeah,
questions from the panel. So I might just for your last slide, if you could kind of punch through it if possible, that'd be wonderful.
yeah, I'm actually done, so that's good.
Ah, well,
Yeah.
perfect interjection. Obviously you have the Regional Leaders Network Forum, which we'll plug in the follow-up email for everyone. Thanks for setting the scene, Lou, and for grounding us in what community benefits are and what they look like for a region and the work that RE Alliance does. It's really useful and it it really sets the scene to start talking about what this looks like from a developer perspective. And we have someone from Koel from Tilt Renewables to talk to that. And I think some of the challenges that you were talking about, grants being, you kind of reaching the limit of the grants that you can allocate. I know in some of the preparation that Koel and I did for this panel, that is something that Tilt Renewables has experienced. And I'm really keen to hear from you now, Koel, about what's Tilt's approach and how does it look like from a developer's perspective to come in and leave communities better off because of a project that you're delivering?
Thanks, Kaz. Yeah, and a lot of those things that Lou was highlighting that we find in practice as well. So I might touch on some of that and how we respond to it and deal with it. So my name's Koel Wrigley. I work at Tilt Renewables. Um, my role there is senior community engagement stakeholder advisor. Nice mouthful. But I work essentially across community engagement, so the information that needs to be provided for development applications, keeping community informed all through the process, but also designing and delivering the community benefits with the community, which um, is actually my absolute favorite part of the job and been a surprise kind of benefit of coming to work within renewables. So we're talking about our lessons. Now, I haven't been at the company for 20 years. Not all of our projects have we had for 20 years. We have got some of them in mergers, but overarchingly, we've been delivering benefits and projects for quite a long time, and I'm bringing some of those today. So next slide. So who are we? Next one. For those who don't know, Tilt Renewable is an Australian developer, owner, and operator of renewable assets. Everyone likes to say they're the biggest. It's a little bit of a thing with the top developers, but I will say that we have the largest number of operational wind farms that we manage. So we've got 12 across the state, and we're building two, and that brings us not just wind farms. We have a couple of solar and a BESS as well, but that brings us to 2.2 gigawatts operating and under construction. We're Australian owned. Our investors are Future Fund and the Queensland Investment Corporation. And a key thing about us is that we aim to have those projects for the whole life cycle. So we originate them where possible. Sometimes we purchase late stage development projects. We develop them, we construct them with the aim to run them for the 30 or so more years with community. So we really do go into our relationships with the community with the idea that we're going to be their long-term partner and their long-term neighbour. And that really shapes and influences how we design things and do development. We also try and build our projects so that they work because we want to run them for 30 years. We don't want to just get them across the line. Next. Having quite so many projects, we're really getting up there now in some of the community benefits. So we have over 1.4 million annually we're delivering in community benefit kind of funding. And that's counting, that's growing all the time. And that doesn't include rates. And that doesn't include, infrastructure upgrades that have to happen for planning. So I think additionally, of course, we don't pay rates in every state, but the ones that we do, we contribute approximately 2.8 million a year to local governments. We have a really, really broad range of things we deliver as benefit sharing, and I'll go into a bit about how we develop that. But basically, we've got programs across education, mental, physical wellbeing, economic participation, environment, First Nations capacity building, local businesses, you name it. And some of them are they do look different. We've got we support a Lifeline officer in one region for 10 years. We've provided money to build a safe housing place for women from domestic violence in a certain region. We have provided food trucks to help businesses get off the ground. We restore wetlands to help manage Brolga populations. It's really varied. You will still see there that we have a lot of money in community funds. And interestingly, because it's actually not necessarily always our preferred way of delivering benefits either. It's got that annual activity that has to happen. We've partnered with Bendigo Bank to help us and make that easier. And we do experience some of the challenges Lou talked about, but communities want it. So my most recent benefit sharing plan that we've developed, when I went and said, these are all the different things you could have, the community was like, we want 40% of the money being a grant funding process that we can apply every year and address local needs, which was interesting. We may change that over time. We'll talk a bit more about valuation, but it does still form a really big part of what we do, partially because that's what the communities really want us to do. Next slide. So what's our policy and how do we apply that? Of course, we're quite large and we have lots of projects. We've got lots of development ones coming in. So our benefit sharing and sponsorship program, we do label them differently, but we do both. They reflect the policy when each asset was built. So we have our oldest was built and commissioned in 1998. So that has less, but every project has a little bit that we supply at least. The New South Wales guideline amount is what we use now for the projects we develop, unless otherwise directed by state policy. So in answer to Lou's question, from our developer point of view, we like the number. The number is helpful. I saw someone comment about, well, how do you engage if you don't know what your megawatt is? I go into the community and I say, we will spend this much per megawatt so that they understand that the figure could change, but at least they get a concept of what the figure could be. We've been doing of that money, we've been doing a 75-25% split community and First Nations. So acknowledging that creating a dedicated First Nation stream is usually a better process. We then obviously work with those communities about how that's spent. So they're not necessarily trying to, get in with the other money. That can be scaled up and down depending on the specific community that we're in. We offer neighbour benefit agreements to our immediate neighbours. So I would argue that if you're doing a neighbour benefit agreement under no policy stipulation, like you're not deemed as being impacting this person and you're responding to that, but you still want to say, well, you're the closest to the wind farm, having a neighbour benefit program can be a benefit. So again, it's one of those yes buts under certain conditions. We let the community decide what their benefits are spent on through engagement and co-design where possible. We are putting the bracket when benefits are delivered by us, and I'll talk a bit more about that because that's changing a lot. We have sponsorship budgets for each asset. We start some benefit sharing in development. We have to be careful with how much. Obviously, in development, we're not guaranteed to develop these projects. We're not making any money. And that's really what the benefit sharing is, a portion of the money that you make from the asset. We're not making any money. What really is helpful now that we're at a certain size is when we start to develop more projects in areas that we've already been in, we can leverage off the existing assets as well as add to it because of the new ones coming in. We're also starting to do portfolio-wide partnerships. So we had our first one last year. We're actually funding a lifeline program called How's Your Mate in Far West New South Wales and regional SA because we realised that it actually covered, I think, 3 operational assets and 3 development ones. So we thought like this is a good broader program to do. And what does that look like in practice? Because, I say all these numbers. So the Palmer Wind Farm that I've just come back from, literally flew in this morning from doing a whole lot of engagement. I'm a little dusty. I have 2 early morning flights. But that one is a 288 megawatt wind farm. That's not a huge wind farm. It's probably a smaller to medium wind farm. That equates to 302,000 annual benefits. We split that 226 to the community, 76 to First Nations. I'm going to get the team to I sent them through a link to a full description of that and how we've engaged and what we're proposing to spend it on. But we also have 2.4 million, 9 million available through our neighbour benefit scheme. Again, not one that's required under law. We're just doing it. So that's over the life of the project. We've sponsorship budgets each year that are discretionary. We've also added I think the megawatt figure doesn't have to be exclusive. And I don't think it's exclusive in any of our projects. It guides that annual amount. But then we have other things. So we have a $1 million First Nations training capacity building fund with that one. And I calculated we spent over 100K in development in the last 2 years leading up. And that was responding to things the community brought to us. Next. The journey, a little bit about the journey. I just want to touch on something that I think it's important for us always to take back, especially like to keep in the back of our mind, especially when we're engaging in the renewable space. Next. Is that we're not walking into a blank slate. So just because it's difficult, it doesn't mean we're doing it all wrong. I just want to tell anyone out there who's in this space and it's hard and contentious, and I've been in other spaces and in and out of the renewables for a while, we're not getting it all wrong just because it's hard. Transition is hard. Next. The CSI Road did an attitude survey, I think 2 years ago now, and it revealed that in out of town, in rural areas, which is where we're building these assets, that 33% of people said that they'd reject a project no matter who was coming in, what was putting on place, who they were. So we're walking into we're not walking into a blank slate, we're walking into negative, that we're then kind of swimming upstream. And that's a bigger, broader political issue, but it does make this scenario hard. Next. What's also hard is how projects work. So development is difficult. There's the fear of the unknown. There's a change coming to them. They don't know how it's going to look and how it's going to feel. The timelines are really long. So Palmer Wind Farm, which we're finally going to construction, that's one I've been engaging on. It's been going for 15 plus years. People have bought into areas being told by their real estate agent the approved project was not happening. And it's been really shocking to find out that it was. And then construction. Construction is disruptive. It is noisier. There is more, there's blasting, there's trucks, there's things on the road. We try and do our best to manage and mitigate it. And often that impact radius can be larger too than the actual wind farm because you're traveling through other places to get to your site. But then what happens in operations is the impacts the low impacts of operations become a reality and the benefits flow. So we kind of have to get through these two hurdles first, and the community has to live through them when we get to the actual part that's not really so bad. And I work, like the projects that I cover include a wind farm that's been operating for 5 to 6 years and a one that's in late stage development, and I've got some early development as well. I can walk into the pub in that one that's been operating for 30 years. We've actually put a Turbine 59 sign on it. We've got a great relationship. That community has dinners with me every year. That's not the same on the ones that I'm working on earlier on. And they've got bigger budgets and they've got all those things, and we've been engaging well, but it's just in a different place. So what have we learned? Next. It gets better and benefits work. So they do work. Perception shift once a project is operational and literally the construction dust settles. I did a little stat across our 12 operational sites. How many complaints do we get a year? And 5 years of data, not streamed by people making multiple, which happens. I just took the number. We've got 4.8 complaints a year. Some of them are legitimate, some of them, are not, but I just took the number. Communities start to see and understand the benefits that are delivered. They start to know to give you a call if they want some support. They start to know the annual grant rounds if that's what they've got. And that's another example of a community dinner that happened for Cooper's Gap. Coexistence becomes obvious and project infrastructure can be beneficial. So we've got some quotes there. The wind farm tracks are built, so no one would ever, before the wind farm tracks were built, no one would ever consider trying to fight a small fire in the area. But now we can actually access those things. We get endless thank yous and quotes, and we kind of keep thinking about how can we show this and how can we share this of community saying that this really helped. Next. What works well? Allowing communities to decide what their benefits are, that really works well. It's not a one size fits all. If you take the same project, same idea into a different community, sometimes you can't deliver it. Sometimes it doesn't work for the community. So really letting them guide that. And sometimes it's not what you think. I went into Palmer and said, I could spend heaps of money on energy subsidies, guys. And they were like, we actually need a community bus to help link up people and get them out of their houses for mental health and well-being. And I was like, okay, I can do that too. But it's not always what you think. Stay present through operations. What Lu talked about is really important. We initially kind of just had our operations projects scattered through our team who are also doing development. We actually made the decision to have a dedicated operations person. And there's only a few times, like I predominantly work in development, but I do also work on some ops because I'm in the same area. But yeah, it really does matter to have that person who's dedicated and thinking about making sure we get that information out, making sure we're running that grant process, making sure we're meeting our obligation to run a tree planting every year with one of our projects. It always comes up on us by surprise. Be present and be a good neighbour that people can call upon. And this goes into the next. Access to discretionary funding is important to address unforeseen community challenges. So this example, that's me with the Silverton community, the transmission line was knocked out 2 years ago in October 2024. The community didn't have power. There was rolling blackouts. There's all these problems that happened out in the Broken Hill area. And when I heard about it, I just thought, how's my community going? Also, it really sucks we can't turn the wind farm on and the solar farm that we have there. Transmission, there's a whole real reason for that. And I rang them up and I was like, how are you going? What's going on? Anyway, long story short, it led to us doing a program with them, which outside of our usual programs, budget was well over what I usually spend on this community. We provided generators for every household and business in the region. We also did it for the community housing for the local Aboriginal land council. And we also did the electrical work so that they could connect it, because apparently blackouts happen quite regularly. So now when a blackout happens, they can just walk outside, plug in their generator and flick on their switch. And it really worked with that community. And you'll see the things that they said. They went on radio and talked about how, that quote's from that, I was not contacted by anyone else except Tilt. So they really saw us as a neighbour and someone in their corner thinking about them. And don't underestimate, even though I agree, we keep our budget separate, don't underestimate the value of small sponsorships. This means a lot to a small club in a rural area to have a whole new set of jerseys that they've never had in 10 years. Yes, it might have our brand on it, but it really helps them. So yeah, I think that always should be part of the package. Next. What's challenging? I have so many stories here, but I'm conscious of time. Community needs and wants change over time. So it's not set and forget in terms of your package. You might have that you've got a budget, right? And they've got to figure out what the cost of operating this project is. That's where the per megawatt figure is valuable for us. But it's not set and forget in terms of your package. You might have that you've got a budget, right? And they've got to figure out what the cost of operating this project is. That's where the per megawatt figure is valuable for us. But it's not set and forget in terms of your package. You might have that you've got a budget, right? And they've got to figure out what the cost of operating this project is. That's where the per megawatt figure is valuable for us. But what we do with that can be constantly changed. And we also find that there's a real interest in community grant processes, but after a few years, a lot of those have been addressed. And so we actually struggle to get ideas from the community to spend. They also might take, I find that often takes my community groups 18 months to 2 years to action that money because they're trying to navigate approvals and all those things. So, and yet some of the communities I work in, it really is only 26 people and the same 26 households and the same groups. So, like, what else can we do? What programs can we fund? Do we group the money up and offer every couple of years? So, always just being prepared to come back and reevaluate that process. Some just don't work. That food truck in Rye Park that was put on and provided to hopefully then get business from the construction workers just really wasn't that successful. We trialed it through construction, and then after that, we reevaluated. The money was redirected to something else, and that's fine. One size fits all does not work. I've talked about that before. We delivered a really great telephone tower in Silverton. We then promised it for Cooper's Gap, and then it was actually been very difficult to roll out in Cooper's Gap, which has been a challenge. We're still working on it. You can improve relationships and operations and address oversights as well. So First Nations has been one. To be honest, when we're designing our benefit programs on the really early projects, we weren't doing things as much there. Now we're kind of improving those relationships and kind of addressing those gaps. 100%, these amounts are growing. So Lu is right. So a team of 6 engagement people whose expertise is engagement is delivering $1.4 million of benefits every year and growing. Like, I'm pretty sure next year we'll be up to 2 million. That is hard. Like, that is not our expertise. And we also need to be delivering engagement. I love it. I'm so grateful that I get to do that as part of my job. But it is, it's not our expertise. So we really do look for opportunities to partner with experienced programs where we can. Different guidelines in every state. I think for us, the sooner we align, a megawatts and some of those things, the better. Like, it does make it easier. Also hard. Some communities you walk into and you're paying rates and others you're not. And it's just flawed. I feel like they're missing out. And balancing hyper-local versus regional benefits is really tricky. Huge value in regional, but the local communities do sometimes find that challenging. They feel like they're living with the impacts. They should be getting the benefits. Last slide. What's changing? So I think we also need to be aware of that. We're rapidly changing all the time. New policies are coming out all the time while we're trying to deliver these projects in the speed that the transition needs. So one thing I want to flag is increasingly developers are being directed to give most of their funding to government coordinated processes. So New South Wales, you have the voluntary planning agreements and access agreements. Queensland's just introduced the community benefit agreements. And Vic is looking into having consolidated funds. So Palmer, that project I talked about, that's in SA. So we took guidelines other places. We've got no stipulations there on how much, and we applied them. Just as an example, if I looked at the stats, if I was in New South Wales, 250,000 of that would go directly to council, and we wouldn't be engaging on, and it wouldn't be our decision. And depending on council, if they engage there. And the remaining 50, if I actually followed the guideline to the letter, should be used to pay for the neighbour agreements. But in many cases, we kind of top that up. And I think the challenge for us then is who is best placed to lead? People talk about legacy impacts, 100%. And some of those government processes are the best place to lead legacy and regional impacts. And then we can do the hyper-local support. However, what's happening, not every case, but there are quite a few cases where those government-supported processes have just run grant programs and funded the same things that we would have through a grant program. So we really do have to think about that and who we're directing the conversation to. We're all about this bigger, consolidated. We support it. We still really want the chance to have hyperlocal because they're our neighbours, they're our community, but we've got to be balanced in that conversation. First Nations expectations are a lot higher across government, across industry. This is great and coming to great outcomes, but we need to build capacity to negotiate on both sides. So developers really understanding it's so complex out there. I have to understand 4 or 5 different states, First Nations situations, plus a lot of them have had a lot of exposure to mining, but not renewable development, which is quite different. And I've got a last point is funds aren't unlimited. Increasing project costs which increasing expectations around budgets, especially when you're adding additional layers. So like this budget plus this access plus this thing increases the cost of making that, like providing that energy. And price of energy is a social license issue as well. So we do need to keep an eye on that. Again, so we're very happy to spend money. Doesn't mean we're not, but we just need to keep that as part of the conversation. And I think that's me.
Thanks, Cole. I love the comparison that Lou looked through, how much was spent on community benefits, and it was 2.5 million, and that's what Tilt is tracking to spend next year alone. This space is changing super quickly, and where we've been and where we're going is a really interesting part of this discussion. Anna, one of the places that we're hopefully going is towards co-investment. You're going to give us a bit of an overview and a discussion about co-investment now. We've got 25 minutes remaining, so if you could hopefully give us the 10 to 12-minute version, if possible, so we can leave time for questions and discussion among the panel, that would be really helpful for our audience, I think, to be able to have some questions answered. I'll throw to you, Anna.
Thanks, Kaz. Yeah, I love a discussion, so I'll try to keep it as brief as possible and just point you to, in the right direction. And you can, if interested, if anything resonates with anyone in the audience, they can just pick up on the resources and read things in further detail. Thanks so much also for organizing this really incredible series. I think it's been really interesting so far. So. Lu mentioned we've worked together quite a bit on a variety of fronts. So we also work on that interface between community and energy transition on a variety of fronts, and that ranges from community engagement to benefit sharing. So a lot of the type of the work that we've already heard about, to regional benefit sharing, and then over to community-led renewable energy. So typically small-scale behind-the-meter, mid-scale projects, and also community partnerships. And that's what I'd like to talk to you about briefly today. So, and I'll pick up on something Lu said. Lu mentioned community benefits is the cherry on top of impact mitigation. So what I'm talking about here when it comes to subscription offers, co-investment, and co-ownership is, if you like, it's the gold standard of community benefits. It's the Ferrari of benefit sharing, and it's emergent in Australia. But my main takeaway for you as an audience is that these models are by no means a pipe dream, and with some concerted effort, I think, from the industry, the broader ecosystem, as well as relevant government authorities, these models are entirely within reach as one, potentially significant component of the just energy transition. So everything I'm going to talk about comes from a resource that we've put together collaboratively with REA, with our partners, First Nations Clean Energy Network, Taryn Lane at Aiken Consulting, as well as a whole range of other partners, and many individuals potentially from the audience as well, and organizations have provided very helpful information for us to be able to compile this resource, and it's coming out early March. So the aim, of course, with this guide is to support stakeholders to explore community partnerships as an option, right? And potentially have a go at them. And so what we've done is really try to pull together the wealth of knowledge that we have at our disposal from international models, experiences, and lessons learned within Australia and overseas as well. And that's funded by the ECA, I should say, and with the further support from Queensland government as well. Next slide, please. So you're probably thinking at this point, well, partnership sounds rather vague. What is she talking about? So I'll start talking a little bit more about what I mean by that and flesh that out for you with some concrete examples of what that could look like. There's a lot more information in the guide about the current status and deployment of these models internationally and within Australia, impacts, barriers to deployment, and some other bits and bobs, such as social equity considerations that might be of interest to some of you. So what do I mean by a community partnership? Really, it's any kind of model where you have a developer or a project proponent. It could be a city council, it could be a utility, it could be a commercial developer. creating an avenue for community to participate in the legal and financial sense in a renewable energy project. And that could be, typically it's a generation/storage project, but it could also be a transmission project or a demand management initiative as well. And that kind of participation, it can take a whole variety of forms. It could be, it could look like an ownership stake. It could be a co-investment, which also involves an upfront capital investment, or it could also be a subscription of some kind. And internationally, if you look at what's happening in this space, we see projects that are initiated by community. We see partnerships that are developer-led, ranging to really, really large programs up to 7 gigawatts of community solar sharing in the United States, for example. And in other cases, it's a genuine partnership where, for example, a community might come up, conceive the project idea, but then the commercial developer takes on and does, the engineering and the procurement and the contracts, and essentially does the brunt of the heavy work in terms of developing the project as well. So in terms of international experience and what that can tell us, it shows that there's this whole range of tried and tested models that are out there. We've described these in details, and unfortunately, I can't really go into detail on each of these models right now, just because of time. But maybe just to give you a bit of a flavor, right? So it ranges from co-investment via fractional investment platform like Asatora. So this is really the model that CWP Renewables pioneered with their Sapphire co-investment scheme. It also includes the 24 or so joint equity ventures that are currently under development here in Australia between commercial developers and First Nations. And internationally, we see so much diversity there in terms of when in the project development kind of stage these equity shares are offered to community, on what terms, and also whether it comes with an active governance role for First Nations organizations as well. And I know First Nations Clean Energy Network I'm sure will speak more to that this afternoon. Then we've also gone into a number of models that are emergent in Australia: community solar gardens, community value sharing and aggregated solutions. So there's obviously a lot of virtual power plants that are currently being put in place, and the role of community there, the community there is also very, very divergent. So that's something we're trying to keep an eye on as well in terms of the extent of engagement and community benefits out of these projects as well. And then finally, we've included a number of projects that largely exist overseas, models, I should say, that exist overseas and don't yet exist in Australia as well, including co-ownership in transmission. And then to sort of add to that, right, because to complement these kind of co-ownership, co-investment models, there are some really interesting things happening around alternative approaches focused on delivering energy bill discounts to communities, and also things like installing home energy equipment or microgeneration programs for community facilities and that type of thing. So what do we learn from all of this? Well, we've learned that these models can become really well established and see really broad take up if they're embedded in existing institutional and policy frameworks. But it generally happens when there is this kind of openness, I think, to integrate social dimensions, socioeconomic dimensions of public policy into energy policy. We've spoken to a lot of stakeholders in the Australian context and understand there's this whole range of challenges in terms of implementing these, and some of them I think Koel has hinted to in her fantastic presentation just prior. But there's clearly a lack of awareness and also legitimacy of what the options are, right, and where to start, how to go about them. There is a clear sort of perception of, and a fear, I suppose, of added complexity to what are already very, very complex project development processes. And I have to say, developers we speak to generally seem really keen to try to explore some of these models, but the hard backdrop that they're up against often comes from investors, essentially, who really need to be convinced, I think, that these partnership models bring added value to a project. And I think there's some work to be done there in terms of knowledge exchange, but also how do we embed this into existing financial instruments, right? So I think I'll leave it there for Barish. Could go on, of course, for some time, but again, have a look if you're interested at the guide when it comes out. So one thing or I think aspect of this that we really try to take seriously is around social equity, just because we're keenly aware that this is front and mind to so many of us at the moment with the cost of living. And I think there's also emerging data showing that some of these models are not as inclusive as we would like, right? Just because they involve an upfront capital investment, for example. So what we've done, my colleague Claudia and Taryn and I have identified some key social equity dimensions that the project proponents can consider, and provided some questions for self-assessment that you can go and feed into your ongoing project design and engagement, with some practical guidance and tips as well as to how you might overcome some of these social equity challenges and improve social equity outcomes. So what you see here is just an illustration of what some of these dimensions are, the social equity dimensions that we're looking at, and how they might pan out under different types of community partnership models. It's really just working through, right? How you could do better on these fronts, and having an openness and a willingness to do that. And I think what we find here is that's interesting is that the social equity outcomes are quite specific to the design choice at project level. But it also comes back to how effectively developers, project proponents, gauge community capacity at the outset and embed these projects in ongoing place-based community-led programs, right? And this speaks to what Koel was saying earlier as well. So we're seeing some developers working, doing amazing work hand in hand with local government and community organizations to kind of even stack different models that meet the needs of different stakeholder groups, for example. So for example, you might end up, making a solar subscription offer available at different price adders based on income, or you might want to combine build discount subscription offers with local energy equipment programs, for example, to cater to different needs. Next slide. Yeah, so I'm gonna try to circle back to what's been said before. Community partnerships like this, they're a big ask. We understand they add more complexity to already complex projects. So it's a really valid question as to ask why we should bother with any of this. And we've done some work to pull together the international evidence base that's emerging on the impacts and outcomes of these types of projects. And there's some really pretty solid evidence out there, including modeling evidence and comparative evidence and even experimental studies now. So in my mind, there's sort of 4 categories of social impact. And we detail these in some detail in the guide if you're interested, but it ranges from everything to just essentially opening the door to a positive, and engaged relationships between communities and project proponents. There's some really interesting recent research to show that it's not just trust in the project that it builds, but it actually builds trust in utilities and governments in more generally in how they're managing the broader energy transition. There's some specific improvements in project outcomes that Koel has already touched on. And there's also some really interesting evidence on transferable skills and capacity building as a result of these projects. So energy literacy, but also organizational capability at community level to manage, commercial or larger projects that then gives them the confidence essentially to go on and do, amazing follow-up projects in education, in local energy services, to fix the ferry, environmental, all sorts of spin-off projects as a result. And then finally, I touch on some modeling. There's some really good modeling out of the US and Scotland that just shows that these revenues over the course of 25 years are typically reinvested in local public goods, right? So they create income and employment locally, but then as a result of the income and employment, you get more local spending and cycles of multiplier effects essentially. And that's where that sort of like regional, economic benefit can really come in. So I've raced through this, and I just want to circle back to the very beginning of today's, talk, where Lu was talking about community benefits, because and put this in context, right? Because this is obviously one of many benefit sharing tools. It sort of sits on the voluntary, innovative, leading practice end of the spectrum. And just a reminder that it can be used in combination with other mechanisms. And it's also in itself not a silver bullet. It's not fit for every community. It has to be kind of emerge on the back of a robust engagement process and be what the community wants, essentially. So we're currently working on a variety of fronts to try to make inroads on projects like this, both in terms of supporting project delivery, also policy development. So if anyone is actively working in this space or interested in ongoing advocacy efforts that can support the broader adoption of these types of partnerships, we'd love to hear from you directly.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks for sharing and thanks for kind of punching through it. I know we've got about 9 minutes left for our panel discussion. I like that we ended on that reminder about what different community benefits are and the scale to regional. Millie, can I get you to stop sharing your screen and to pop all the panelists' faces up? We're gonna, I'll send the session evaluation out at the end of it so that we can punch through as many questions as we can as a panel. There's lots of themes that I picked up on during your presentations that are consistent. There's a lot of conversation about agency and about communities having agency and power to decide. I've got lots of words circled in my notepad here. But we had a question that came in, and I'm waiting for questions. If you have them, pop them in the chat, and I'll put them to our panel. Some of them have been answered as we go. When should you start working on community benefits? When's the best time? We had this come through in the registrations. Should we be doing that before or after our planning and environmental approvals? Koel, I'm interested, Tilt works on many projects in development. You showed us the diagram. When should people start working on community benefits?
So what we've tried to do a little bit, Tilt, is to have a quite structured development process. So we make sure we kind of we know certain things before we go super public with our process. And usually that is when we're really kicking off the detailed planning and surveying that we will kind of be more out there. We will always talk about benefits from the minute we go out in terms of this is all part of the project. As I said, the way I address the megawatts and how you might do is I explain that. I say, we're going to do 1,050 per megawatt. This is what we're thinking now, but that may change. Planning, we may remove turbines, we might things like that. So I just shared that dilemma with people. What is tricky is, and I think you can therefore start talking to people and asking what they want at any point that start. What I do find tricky though is sometimes people aren't in the headspace to get into that detail yet. So it really wasn't into the last 18 months of Palmer that I could get people in that headspace of what, this is your money, what do you really want to spend it on?
Yeah.
Similarly, because people then also want to talk about early, we don't have the money. So I think we always talk about it, but yeah.
So it's early, it's ongoing, and then it's obviously reviewed throughout operations.
Yeah. But we can't deliver high amounts of it until we know the project's going ahead. Because benefits it is meant to be, you're taking a proportion of the money that you're making and spending on the community, that's the financial model.
Yeah. Thanks, Koel. The next question that we had in registrations, and if you have them, pop them in the chat. We've been answering some of you in the chat as we go, and thanks for people who are sharing resources in there. Is can renewable energy projects be standardized nationally under a simplified and unified, registration or benefits approach? Anna, you were talking about the policy context, to embed co-investment and these sorts of leading practice approaches. What does that look like nationally? What are our options?
So Koel, I think, really showed why this has to be a tailored approach right on the ground. In terms of the incentive structure, I think we can probably do a better job, and ARI Alliance is doing an amazing job at this, is in terms of collating what works and potentially making sure that states are all going about this in the best way. At federal level, I think, you know, there are ways to embed this within the biggest market-based incentives that essentially, channel investment into renewable energy and to make sure that sort of it starts at that level. Because that has been a huge nudge to get developers over the line in terms of going the extra mile to do really innovative things in terms of delivering community benefits. So I really do think it has to happen at multiple levels. It's a nice thought, right? Standardize everything. But the politics of it, I have to add that the politics of it. But Lu, I think Lu will have
Yeah, I
more.
was going to throw to you
Yeah,
next,
yeah.
Lou.
Yeah, I think it's a tricky one. I think um, I'd love to see some kind of national, whether it's a guideline or a standard, I don't know, but to give everyone more clarity because it's such a busy space. There's so many different rules that apply in different places and within places as well, depending on, finance mechanisms and so on. So I'd love to see some kind of, yeah, standardization with that lens of like, how do we just give people more clarity around what they should be expecting and asking for and delivering? But within that, yes, we need to retain as much flexibility as we can to respond to the local context and make sure we're doing work that's appropriate for that local area.
Yeah. So clarity, flexibility, clarity for communities, regions, and developers through like a national piece. Um, yeah, I really like that. I'm really conscious of time, and we've heard lots of really interesting insights from each of you through your presentations, and now we've just got 3 minutes to go, which is a little bit sad. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you for a 40-second summary, which I think you can do because it's a punchy world. Just like a really quick sum up about what brings you the most hope for how we navigate community benefits together in this industry? What are you most excited about? Lu, we heard from you how it's changed. Koel, we heard from you how it's changed from a tilt perspective. When you looking forward, what's getting you out of bed in the morning in terms of what should we be excited about in this space? Anna, can I go to you first? You look like you've got something to contribute here.
Yeah, I actually think I was on the Renew podcast and hearing the most technocratic, most, kind of engineering, finance approach to renewable energy, sort of those types of people recognizing and that social license is a huge issue, and that actually the social political dimensions should potentially be at the forefront of how we do policy and practice, right? Rather than an afterthought. I really think we're getting to that point. It's just about how the implementation, operationalizing that. And I think to that extent, even seeing it in AMO's 2026 ISP featuring more prominently, I think, there's work to be done, but I do think at least we've got consensus on the problem, essentially. Mm.
All right. And Lu?
Oh, it's so hard, but I think what excites me is just seeing the regional leadership that is emerging out of this and people across the country who are going, whoa, there's a lot happening. How the heck do we channel all of this investment into outcomes for our community and navigate all of the challenges and the mess that is the energy transition and then realize the opportunities out of that? And I'm just seeing like people get really smart about it and just are elevating the conversation and are just continuing to step up around how can that coordination and agency happen at a local level instead of all just being top down. So yeah, that's what really gets me out of bed.
Yeah, I like it. Regional leadership and how we're making it happen. Cool.
Simplistic adding to these, but the size of the projects and the commitments, like they're large, they're money that can do something. So it's really hard when you've only got $15,000. Like how do you do anything with that? But when you've got hundreds of thousands of dollars, especially as I said, we're looking at portfolio, so we start to look at broader. It really, yeah, it can really change things. So that I sat down with the First Nations governance group for Palmer yesterday for the first meeting about how to spend $1 million purely on First Nations training capacity. And they were like, this is big, like we can actually do something with this. And to be honest, that was driven by CIS. That extra in our package was driven by CIS. So those projects, capacity investment scheme for people, those incentives are working.
I really love that. It is a lot of money and it is a big transformation that we're undergoing as a country. And thank you all so much for coming along to have this conversation, to listen to one another. It's such an important conversation to have and to continue, so that we can continue to support communities in this transformation and so that we can capitalize on this really big opportunity that's before us. So thanks to each of our panelists for coming along. It was really valuable. I really enjoyed working with each of you to pull this together and to get to where we are now. And thanks to Capire for hosting the Just Transition. Everyone on the line, you'll get a session evaluation. Maybe you wanted to have your camera on or you wanted it to roll slightly differently. We're open to that. And this is just to spark the beginning of a conversation that Capire will continue to have. So thanks so much to everyone. And Millie doing tech in the background, you legend. We really appreciate you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.